New companies are emerging that claim that their AI software can do automatic editing of your real estate photos, but are these any good? Could they replace editors? And a big one, is it even affordable to use their software? I'm going to address all of that in this video with test results, which, by the way, were independently done. No company has sponsored this video or given me free credits or anything else to do this video. In fact, 3 different companies have reached out to me over the last couple months and I just didn't respond. This being such a new field, I wanted to give it some true black box testing. I didn't want to have any of these results biased by any company giving me some favoritism. And among these companies were Imogen AI, Auto HDR, and a new one, Fotello. Now, you may have already heard of Imogen AI and Auto HDR, and they've been around for a little while, and you've probably already seen reviews that cover some of their standard, sometimes substandard type of results. So I'm not going to get into those specifically. Fotello has been the new one lately that seems to be gaining a lot of ground, and a lot of people are talking about it. So I really wanted to dive into that one deeply. Now, if you do want me to take a closer look at any of these other software packages, I'd be more than happy to. A simple YouTube search though, you'll find a lot of reviews on that. But taking a look at Fotello, that's where we really get into some deep testing, because if it claims, as it does, to do high-end listing photography, well, it doesn't really stand up to really good HDR. It's really easy to take any plain type of neutral interior photo and do HDR with it. But the true test of doing good HDR compared to traditional HDR or flambient is to see if it will stand up to difficult interiors with a lot of color. And that's what I wanted to feed into it first, along with some other test results as well. And these test results will cover a comparison between Fotello and what it can do with its AI HDR, and also then the traditional HDR, but also flambient, because it really is a fair comparison at this point to say, well, what would work best under these various conditions that you might be up against, and then what would drive your decision to use one or the other for some of your real estate photo editing. So let's start with this very difficult room. This was shot for an interior designer, and this has a lot of blue in it. Now, it's a very, very dark room to capture, and in this particular instance, this is a flambient image, and this was just using two 80-200 Pros and shoot-through umbrellas going straight into the room, and then a little bit of luminosity blending, some of the ambient blending. But notice that I really didn't get much in the way of window views here, and reason being is it really wasn't necessary for small windows like this. I could have done a better window pull. I could have sky swap replaced it, because this was also a stormy day, extremely overcast, but that's okay. These are not really accenting the views out of here. They're just showing a little bit of color. There's more emphasis here on the room. So once again, this though is the flambient image. When I was there, I also took a bracket so that I could do HDR, and the reason being is just in case, yeah, but also I like to practice a lot with HDR just to see how far I can push it and in very different circumstances. So when I applied the high-end HDR technique to it, this is what I got. So this is high-end HDR, and there are some differences here. Now, I did have to do a lot more color correction. The windows are a little bit more blown out, but this still really doesn't bother me that much. For a real estate listing, this would be passable, no doubt about it. Now, for an interior designer, not so much. You'll see that that's very bright here on the pool table. It was very hard to tone that down, and you can see some of the colors still aren't matching. I'm still getting some casts, even after doing a lot of color correction. But this is why I teach both of these methods. Doing, for instance, flambient, which is here, that's what I teach in my Pro Interiors course. When we're talking about HDR, I teach this in my Expert Editing course. Knowing all the techniques really does help you make a decision on what you want to use for what job. It's just having a variety of different tools in your box to pull out and use when you need. So comparing this though, if I were to take this is the high-end HDR. If I were to take these same pictures and put them into Fotello, this is what I got. Now, Fotello did a great job with the windows out here, but really just the views, because there's halos all over them. It looks completely fake, but the biggest thing here, it's just completely washed out. there is just almost a lack of color. Now, this is very common with these automatic HDR editors. What they do is they detect the floor and darken it. They detect the outside view from that part of the bracket and they darken that so they can blend it easier. Everything else is then brightened way up and then the shadows are jacked, and this is what you end up with. You can see the colors are just off. Look at these chairs. What a pity that they turned out like this. Once again, high-end HDR brought all those colors out. And also Flambient did a really good job on giving a more natural look to it with really evening out the light. But high-end HDR compared to Fotello, well, Fotello just did not live up to expectations. But let's take a look at some other stuff here. Now, this is in the same house, and once again, it's a bit of an overcast day, so I'm not really worried about the clear view to the outside. This is a Flambient image, and because of this wood ceiling up here, once again, I used some 8200 Pros in shoot through umbrellas. Now, a couple things here to notice before we start comparing this to the high-end HDR and Fotello is that this house has Venetian plaster. This Venetian plaster has a very unique pink tone across it that's warmed up by the various lights. Now, there isn't much in the way of lights. Look at these tiny little halogens up here, tiny little ones that are in this chandelier, and then these over here on the wall, these type of candle sconces, they're very, very bright in comparison. But with flash, using this, with the Flambient technique using flash, then all this is evened out. If we take a look at this in Fotello, all of the color basically goes away out of the wall. It gets completely desaturated. The sky was swapped. It's one of the options that they have, but the halos are horrendous around the windows, and you can see there's a lot of bloom. Other issues here, I did have perspective correction turned on, but it didn't. You can see the difference between the Flambient, where I did my upright perspective in Lightroom Classic, but at Fotello, the picture is still rotated. Yeah, I could fix that in post, but I'm really after somebody else doing my editing for me if I was going to be using this software. The biggest thing though is how washed out this is in comparison. Look at these chairs and also the floor. Now, doing my own high-end HDR on this, well, the results were somewhat better. So this is high-end HDR compared to using Flambient. Obviously, the Flambient here is definitely better than any type of HDR. And we're also up against challenges here with this floor because it was just so dark that if you didn't use flash, like here with the Flambient technique, then you would never see the color of the floor because it was just so dark coming out of the brackets. That's why all the HDR, whether it's the high-end HDR or Fotello, things are just really washed out on that floor. But Fotello really robbed this space of its color, including, you can see the walls. At least here with my high-end HDR, I was able to capture the color of the Venetian plaster. And of course, when I did Flambient, then all of that is there. Here's another example, same house, castle type of living room. And one of the things to note here is that these couches here have a bit of a pink hue. Now this is Flambient once again. When we take a look at Fotello, this is what it came up with. Now you could cool the temperature a little bit, but you're not going to bring back the pink. In that. That's going to be very difficult to do. That's what was done here with the Flambient shot. Now, I left the outside kind of blown out, once again, a stormy day, and it really doesn't need to be there for this shot. Now here, they did bring in the view, so they did a better job, although the outside view looks a little muddy, and it was just so dark and contrasty up here, it just looked fake. But let's look at something a little easier for Fotello. So here, this is a Flambient shot of this house, and I want you to pay attention here to the various colors. Now, mostly this is neutral. This is something that the automated AI programs like Fotello can do a fairly good job with. But when we look at the Fotello results, we can see that for one, it got way overexposed. It did a nice sky swap here over the mountains, and that's fine for whatever it is. It still looks a bit fake. But the biggest thing here is notice the difference in the color of the chairs. Let me go back to the Flambient image. You'll notice those chairs are green. When I go to Fotello, they turn brown. This is an effect of desaturating colors in other areas. Things that they feel might have too many shadows, they bring them up, then they desaturate down. They're ruining the tonal range. And that's very typical of just HDR in general. So even when we take something that should be very easy for Fotello to replicate this, Well, in some areas it did a pretty good job, but in other areas it did fail. But let's take something that's kind of in between. Now, this is still a very common color scheme that you would find in a lot of houses. It was really in about 20 years ago. Well, a lot of people don't remodel their homes before they put them up for sale, and so you're going to see these earth tone colors. So this was a flambient shot. And so what I'm doing here, I've got an 8200 in the other room, I've got an 8200 by camera, and doing the simple two-sided composite like I've shown in other videos and I show throughout the Pro Interiors course. Did a darken mode window pull, and these are looking good. When I put it through Fotello, this is what it came up with. Now, the sky looks a lot better here. It's way too dark over here, but look at these chairs. I don't know what happened here. It looks like they're just dirty and filthy. The picture never got any upright perspective. Once again, let's go back to the flambient. You can see how clean and crisp all the colors are, and those chairs do not look dirty. I don't know why when going to Fotello, all of a sudden it decided that it needed to make this dark, these things dark. It just didn't make any sense. The carpet also looks really filthy, because it was really more of a white colored carpet. So this would be another Fotello fail, especially look at the ceiling. This looks almost blown out. Once again, what they do, all of these AI programs tend to take the interiors and jack up the exposure, then take the exteriors and turn down the exposure so that when they blend them, they get something that fits a little bit more. And one last example too, with something that should be very simple for Fotello, and that's this. You might have recognized this before. This is my kitchen actually. And it's a lot of neutral colors in here, so it's fairly easy to do. This is using the high-end HDR technique, and in fact, these files are in the examples in my course on expert editing that you can use. So this uses the high-end HDR technique. When I put the same thing through Fotello, I got this. Now, it's really not that bad overall, but there are some very distinct differences to notice. One, yes, it did sky swap out here, but once again, darkening that outside exposure so much, look what it did to the view outside. It just doesn't match. Going back to my HDR, you can see that you can even tell that there's a yellow hue up here, and that's from the wild mustard weed that grows during the time of year when this was taken. Also, take a look at the window view over here. Now, I can see that the window beam here is a little on the dirty side, typical of doing HDR of any type, but when we go over to Fotello, it's like this neon bright white thing because, once again, they're jacking up the interiors. That's also why it's leaving these halos that are around these windows. But when we take it to the extreme, when we're taking a look at color, Fotello, here in this case, completely breaks down. It just can't handle it. Well, I don't know if I'm going to come across when I'm shooting, before I enter a house, they've booked me. I don't know if it's going to look like this or whether it's going to look like this or maybe even something easier. But is it worth it? Let's take a look at the pricing. This is over on fotello.co/pricing. And they have this pricing calculator, which is a little bit deceiving. It really frustrates me when companies do this. You can take a look at what it costs monthly. You can take a look at what it costs yearly. And what you would do is you tell them about how many listings you have per month. Let's say it's 25 or 50. Well, $20 per listing looks like it'd be really reasonable, but wait till you scroll down and you actually take a look. That means you'd be billed $1,000 a month, no matter what, whether you use those listings or not. Now, the listings do roll over onto the next month, but you still have to keep paying $1,000 a month, and that was based on the idea that you would be doing 50 listings a month. You go down to the 25, then they're still expecting you to do the 25 at that $20. You'd be paying $500 a month. So it's a little bit deceiving. Also, to really sign up and to use it, you have to secure a spot. You have to click on this thing, and basically you have to contact them. You have to have a meeting with them. And I understand they're a startup, but when somebody does this, it immediately screams dogma. If you can't tell me you can give me this for a price, I don't need to talk to sales. It's very rare that companies would do that. So all of this just screams chintzy to me. It's not something that really pleases me, and maybe some of that also biased me in some of my reviews, although I think the images themselves, well, they speak for themselves. So anyways, if you were to be realistic and say, I need to really outsource, I do at least 50 a month. If you do 50 a month, or let's say you even do 75 listings a month, hey, that's great, $16 per listing. But when you take a look at the fine print, you'd be paying $1,200 a month. Now, They could come back, and I'm sure I'm going to get some nasty grams from Fotello for this review, but if I were to go to the yearly savings, which would save you 20%, only $12 per listing, that still means that you're going to be paying over $10,000 per year. Now, would that be cheaper than using an outsourced editor? Well, that's their argument, and that your savings here, they're calculated on, for instance, 50 photos per listing at a cost of $1 per photo. But once again, this requires a payment either every year or every month. When you're outsourcing, you pay by the job. You aren't dedicated to using just one editor, and you aren't committed to paying a subscription for that editor either. Other things though to consider, which are actually more important than just the quality, some of it is the affordability. As we saw, it can be a little pricey using this, and would it be worth it if you're getting just iffy results and they're a little bit spotty and you lose a lot of your creative control over it? But with that then, you have to consider price to the company's longevity. Right now, companies that first come out like Fotello, they're going gangbusters and they're working very hard to really get a good product. But with effort comes cost, and with that cost, it has to be then passed on to its consumers, and that's us being the photographers. So think about what's happened over time with different companies. Matterport eventually, without making much money, got bought up by the CoStar Group and now is biased toward their websites, which are homes.com and apartments.com. Also Aereo, remember them? Well, they also got swallowed up by Zillow. So with that then, they might have an affordability issue. They get swallowed up by someone bigger, well, then they could have favoritism from that company, whether it's Zillow, whether it's going to be CoStar, or something else. That does become concerning. But either way, it's a matter of, do I want to put right now all of my eggs in one basket, for instance, like Fotello or Imagen AI or someone else, when I don't know what the longevity of that company is going to be? And also something to consider is once somebody does start making something in the editing realm, Adobe, Luminar, all these companies eventually jump on board and they start doing something similar as well. Another big issue to consider is how your photos will differentiate between your competitors. So if you're just editing your photos the same way somebody else is, and somebody else then is really doing the work, you have a common denominator being your exact same editor, being the exact same software, well, then you're not going to stand out at all. All that'll happen is everybody will just be in a race to the bottom to be the cheapest, because you're really not doing any work anymore. You're basically turning into a glorified shutter release. You have no artistic control. What comes out is what the person gets. Another thing too is that if you are outsourcing your HDR to an editor, you do have a little bit more communication with them. You can also get them trained on the way that you like to edit your photos, and you'll probably get more consistent results. The thing though with Fotello and these other programs is that their turnaround is very quick. Now we know that HDR does have its limits, and that's just a matter of physics, and that's why eventually at some point you probably will have to incorporate Flash. You know that I do favor the Flambient workflow. It's something I've done for years, and the reason being is that every single time, no matter what the house is, no matter what I show up and see, it gets shot the exact same way. I don't have to worry about an all blue room, something that might have some desaturation come out of it to get rid of the color cast, the way that HDR might have to deal with it. Instead, I'm in control of the light. Remember, when you control the light, you control the image, something I've said time and time again. But Flambient doesn't always fit for everybody, and I understand that, and that's why I teach both HDR and also Flambient. Once again, Flambient's in the Pro Interiors course, and high-end HDR, different techniques of high-end HDR, are in my Expert Editing course. So it really comes down to then what fits well with you and what would fit if you're doing some automatic AI. So here would be my recommendations. If you're a Flambient shooter, if you do want that real high-end look, and especially if you're going to work for interior designers, remodel companies, anything architectural and design, or even luxury listings, then yeah, Flambient works really well, and none of this automatic AI is even necessary. It just doesn't even fit the bill. Long time ago, I had asked Imagen AI when they had reached out to me, I said, well, do you do Flambient editing? No. Do you do window pulls? Oh yeah, well, when I looked into the window pulls with Imagen AI, it was just changing the exposure of the outside view. That's all that it was doing. So if you're a Flambient shooter, none of this really applies. If you're an HDR shooter, this is then where you're at a bit of a crossroads. So if you really want the high-end HDR look, then yeah, you'll want to be in control of that, whether you edit it, whether you teach an editor to do it, whatever that is, The high-end HDR gives you full artistic control over what you're going to produce. If you're then thinking about, well, I don't need to have that, I'm just high volume and I don't really care that much about quality, and you're outsourcing and you're getting okay quality, that now is really the crossroads. That's where you have to decide, well, do I want to outsource to an editor or do I want to outsource to automated AI? Now, automated AI does have a very quick turnaround. The photos that I got out of Fotello took just minutes. It was very, very quick. But I'm kind of left with what they made. Yeah, I could tweak a little bit of the downloaded files, but it's not the same as editing those raw files. If you're working with an editor, then you can establish some type of reputation, some type of rapport with them on how you want to have things edited, especially if you know who you're outsourcing to and you have worked with someone very long and you do know them personally. This brings up a bigger question to also consider, is that if you're outsourcing your HDR editing, do you know if who you're outsourcing to is not a machine? How do you know this is a real person? As these technologies continue to evolve, a problem that's faced a lot of outsourcing really then gets amplified. And that's that when you would first outsource, you'd get these fantastic results back, but over time they get kind of poor quality, substandard. And that's typically because the primary editor would edit your initial photos, but that primary editor, the advanced one, the expert, doesn't have time for everybody, so they hand that off to junior editors. Well, the same could start happening with some of these overseas editors where they just use companies like Fotello or Imagen AI or something else just to edit your photos for you. So something to really watch for. So for me, what would it be? Well, for me, it's going to be just like I have for years and years and years. I prefer to use Flambient. That's what my customers expect. And one of the reasons being too is because doing Flambient led me on a path that was just initially the listing market, but now over half of my work is architectural and design, and that pays a lot more. But thinking that you could actually make more money and have more control over what you're doing and enjoy what you're doing more, that's when the art of photography comes in. And it's not just in real estate photography, it's any genre. So whether you're doing weddings, whether you're doing portraits, events, whatever it is, that artistic control is what makes your photos a representation of what you see as a photographer. So while AI is a great tool to help us edit, no matter what method you're using, to completely pass off our editing onto AI really does make things questionable. And for me, as a professional photographer who for a lifetime has loved the art of photography and has made a great income doing it, I'm not stepping on to the automated AI editing bandwagon just yet. I'd also encourage you to step back a little bit and really consider your future and your career as a real estate photographer and if this would make good business sense for you.